configuration. Quetzal says that is correct. But listen further, with Gilgamesh's people, it concerned a race of morphogenetic ones, whose special ability was to change their shape and size. A process that took several months for each occurrence, however. Billy says, first of all, why do you speak of concerned and was? And secondly, does your explanation with regard to the morphogenetic ones mean that it concerns a morphogenesis precisely in terms of biological morphology? Morphogenesis, nevertheless, refers to the formation of an organism or life form during his or her development, whereby everything depends on the hereditary predisposition and on the environment. Do you mean this? Quetzal says, no, that is not the meaning of my words. Rather, I speak of a shape-shifting that can be carried out arbitrarily during normal existence. Billy says, do you mean, for example, when the development of the physical body has already been completed? By this, I mean that our shape-shifting can be accomplished when. Quetzal says that is the meaning of my words, yes. Billy says shape-shifting, then one could very well call these humans shape-shifters. Can they change, then, also their external and internal features, apart from their shapes? Quetzal says that is correct. Billy says you have not yet answered my question, however, as to why you said concerned and was. Quetzal says Gilgamesh's people no longer exists because a sudden and unpredictable planetary catastrophe caused the whole race to become extinct within a few minutes. There were no survivors because no human beings of this people also stayed outside of the planet. Gilgamesh is, thus, the sole survivor, who has adapted his shape, however, to that of the earthly human and has morphogenetically transformed and found a new home in this world, which he no longer wants to leave. Billy says, oh, so that's how it is. Then something else, you recently said something about a water shortage that would be on Earth in the coming time. Quetzal says yes. Already in the coming 90s, the drinking water on Earth will become a rare commodity in certain countries. Thus, there will be a big drinking water problem that, especially in the so-called developing countries, will lead to very big problems and even to catastrophes. In contrast to this, however, the encouraging fact will arise that some areas, which have been destroyed and made barren by the Earth people, will slowly recover again purely according to nature and become green. Nevertheless, this process will only proceed slowly and bring success, always provided that everything won't be newly ruined and destroyed again by the people, which is to be feared, unfortunately, when one considers their illogical and profit-demanding thinking and behavior. Billy says this fear probably exists rightfully. Then I once again have a question regarding the Egyptian pyramids, as I was also asked about them. Unfortunately, I no longer remember exactly what Ptah, Semi-Aza, and ask it explained to me, but somehow, I think it was said to me that the first pyramids were built around 73,300 years ago or so, but later dismantled again because they fell to decay, namely through rotting in the interior as well as through the weather. In particular, this refers to the pyramids of Giza but also to many other pyramids all over the world. Afterwards, everything was rebuilt, which should have happened around 10,800 or 11,000 years ago. At this time, about 300 years before the Great Flood, a certain King Seljuk was the person of power, who ordered the dismantling and alteration of the Great Pyramid of Giza and allowed this to be carried out. But again, everything molded over the course of the following millennia and fell to decay, so about 4,500 years ago, an enormous pyramid work resulted once more, as everything that was mouldering and decaying was torn away, removed, and replaced. Thus, accordingly, new stone blocks were cut and then dragged and set up by human power. At the same time, the main pyramid completely lost its internal structure and organization, and it was built anew under the strict power of Heps and completely revamped. Therefore, one can very well say that the current Pyramid of Giza can actually also be called the Pyramid of Heps, even though its actual origin traces back to other and partly Earth-foreign builders from the constellation of Orion, and indeed, to a time of 2 stellar ages ago, one of which is reckoned as around 36,650 years, and thus, in a 2 times form, yields a time of 73,300 years, whereby this time must be set before the Islamic Hejra, however. And when we speak of the Pyramid of Giza, we always speak of the pyramid that must be seen as the original pyramid, even if today the new production is addressed, which is, of course, already about 4,500 years old and is exposed to rotting and decay, and which also no longer exhibits its original measure of 152.5 meters in height but only 146 or 148 meters. This Great Pyramid, together with the others, is aligned in its formatting to the constellation of Orion, while the calf structure, the Sphinx structure, was aligned to the constellation of Leo. The new pyramid, as well as all the others and the Sphinx structure, were built in more recent times, so about 4,500 years ago, solely by Earth people, by their own forces. The builders were early Egyptians, like also the largest part of the workers, who were free people and artisans to a certain part, while many others, who came in small numbers as slaves from other countries, had to perform their hard work, together with a small number of domestic slaves. That majority of the workers, however, was based on free Egyptians. For the purpose of the nourishment of all work forces, a veritable industrial food city was built near the pyramid, and also mass campsites were provided for resting and sleeping, as well as tombs for the many deceased, who were at work there. That's how I remember it being explained to me by you. Now, is this right, or did I fall into a fallacy? Quetzal says everything is correct, so therefore, no further explanation is necessary. Billy says already several times, we've talked about gene technology and gene manipulation, etc., about which a lot of senseless fuss will be made in the coming time, and indeed, especially by the so-called progress opponents and, in this case, even the genetic opponents, who will conjure up death and the devil with absurd assertions and scare tactics, in order to thwart, stop, and denigrate genetic research and gene technology. This in ignorance of the fact that already for many years, genetically modified vegetables, fruits, and other foods have been produced and have been on the market and have also been eaten by the genetic opponents unknowingly and without hesitation as well as without harm. Now, the question about this is whether this fact will actually be concealed much longer. Quetzal says silence will probably rule over this for good, because otherwise an uproar would be caused by the genetic opponents. Billy says I understand. Since ancient times, maniacs have always had a tendency to run amok at every possible and impossible opportunity or otherwise to become abusive. I have also just experienced this again, regarding that which I wrote in one of my stories in the storybook, that in the atmosphere, the finest dust particles are needed, in which the natural water vapor can condense itself, so that raindrops can develop and, thus, it can rain. One insulted me rather nastily on the telephone and yelled that I shouldn't write such crap and mislead the children with it and so on. But Svarth already taught me that it actually is in such a way as I have written. And if I remember correctly, he called the atmospheric dust particles aerosols. Quetzal says you have written no falsehoods because the process of rain formation actually takes place in the way that you have represented everything. And the term aerosols also corresponds to the truth. Billy says then once again, I would like to come to speak on the greenhouse effect and on the climate change. A subject that we've already discussed several times. One thing has escaped me, however, namely what the sun produces on the earth through its energies, which contributes to the greenhouse effect and to the climate change. The earth person's destructive influence on the nature of the planet, that is on the atmosphere, takes place through the releasing of carbon dioxide and bromine gases as well as through the actual chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs for short. Through these substances, so you have explained, a coat or layer, so to speak, is formed around the earth, by what means the solar heat reflected by the earth can no longer escape into outer space. From this, an accumulation